Amy, let me tell you about a magical place that is so exactly designed to be enclosed space, year-round fun for the whole family that I bet you already know what I'm going to say before I even say the name. Let's say it together on 3. 1, 2, 3. Great Wolf Lodge. You got it, Amy.
My kids loved Great Wolf Lodge when we went. You probably already know that it has a huge indoor water park with a wave pool, lazy river, a bunch of massive water slides. But then your pack can hit the other attractions because, wait, there's more.
Great Wolf Lodge has adventure-packed attractions like Magi Quest, a live-action game kids can play throughout the lodge, plus the Northern Lights Arcade. Spent some quality time there, so your kid who loves the lazy river and your kid who loves fantasy games will both have a great time.
Great Wolf Lodge also offers great dining options and complimentary daily events like nightly dance parties, all under one roof. Unpack the car once and you're settled in to have fun. And with 22 lodges across the country, you're always a short drive away from adventure.
We've both had such great times at Great Wolf Lodge, so bring your pack together at a lodge near you. Learn more at greatwolf.com and strengthen the pack. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fresh Take from What Fresh Hell, Laughing in the Face of Motherhood. This is Margaret.
And this is Amy. Today, we are talking to author and very old friend of ours, Susan Dominus. Susan Dominus is a staff writer for the New York Times Magazine. In 2018, Susan was part of a team reporting on workplace sexual harassment that won a Pulitzer Prize for public service. In 2024, her New York Times Magazine article on menopause won a National Magazine Award. Susan has studied as a fellow at the National Institutes of Health and Yale Law School. She teaches journalism at Yale University. Most importantly, Susan and Margaret basically grew up together, and Susan and I went to college together. But today, we're mostly going to talk about her first book, which is The Family Dynamic, A Journey into the Mystery of Sibling Success. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you both so much for having me. I can't tell you how great it is to be here with you today.
So this book is about family dynamics. How did you come to this topic? You've obviously written about a huge range of topics. What was like the book is family dynamics after all of the different things you've written about?
You know, it's funny. I actually think that as a child, I considered myself a little bit of a familyologist. And one of the reasons for that is my parents used to go away on business trips and I would stay with friends of the family. For example, the Goldies, whom I know. Margaret, you know.
Oh, yeah. So I should just be clear that Susan and I met in middle school when she was the closest friend of my sister, Kate. A second friend I have stolen from Kate because the whole reason I have a podcast is that I stole Amy.
Well done. Well done.
We're just continuing a theme here.
And your brother, John, was very friendly with Mark Goldie, and the Goldies were my parents' best friends. So I used to stay there for 2 weeks, and their family culture around dinner, for example, was very different from my family. There was a lot of like math quizzes for fun and discussion of current events, whereas at my house, the imperative was really like chew with your mouth closed. And I was very interested in, well, what happens when parents really kind of cultivate a certain learning environment in the household? I mean, we had tons of books in my house, don't get me wrong, but there wasn't this kind of concerted cultivation. Or there were other families I stayed with as well. And then when I got older, I went to summer camp with some cousins whose parents were extremely successful people who were well-known public figures, like Wendy Wasserstein, the playwright, was an aunt of theirs, and Bruce Wasserstein, who was this legendary financier, and one of their mothers was like a trailblazing executive. And I just remember thinking like, wow, what was going on in the Wasserstein household? You know, what was the energy? I was genuinely curious. And I have been genuinely curious about that all of my life, including when I got to Yale and had a roommate, Anya Epstein, whose grandfather was one of the writers of Casablanca and her father ran a creative writing department. So I was both interested in families where there was a tradition of active learning and also the belief that you could do anything. You could write one of the most important movies in cultural history, or you could become this playwright, or you could change financial markets. But also, were there burdens associated with that? Or was that all positive? Like, I was just very interested and curious about those kinds of families where there's some kind of streak of success going on.
And you talk about the siblings and how siblings come into that, because I think I've thought before about how successful parents have successful children, but it's the interplay between siblings that you explore in this book, which on its face seems like that would be pretty inextricable from parental influence. But I think you're saying, as you started working on this book, that there's something about that sibling dynamic that is unique and contributes its own set of things.
That's exactly right. I actually went into the book expecting it to be a book in which I would learn about parenting exclusively. And for sure, there are interesting insights about these parents throughout the book. And I think they set a tone for the family of like, sky's the limit. We can talk about family mottos. I think that's all really interesting. So I think the parents set a tone either by their own example or what they explicitly tell their kids that they can dream big. But then what you see is that the siblings also really influence each other, either in terms of how they individuate or how they set their own goals, but also very, very practically, because I sort of say that parents send this like arrow of ambition into the air, but then the siblings help direct it, because people of your generation have more vision for you than really your own parents can, because they can see the future in a way that your own parents can't. So there are lots of anecdotes in the book, I think, that are really interesting. But just a very quick one is about a young woman who at the time was a young woman named Marilyn Hollifield. She was Black. She'd gone to Swarthmore. It was not a time when there were very many female Black lawyers, period. But her brother, who had gone to Harvard Law School, insisted that she go, really encouraged her. And I just don't think her parents would have placed her there. But he had vision. He'd been there. He could imagine it. She went, and it really changed the course of her life. And it was very consequential for the city of Miami, where she lived, and became an important leader. And to this day, she's actually one of the very few Black female law partners in the country. It's like a very small share of the partners in major law firms are Black women. So anyway, her brother was hugely consequential for her in that regard.
And your book is not particularly, compared to some books that we've talked about on the podcast, prescriptive. You're not coming up with like the swamp method of raising children who have good ambition, and there's an S, a W, and A, and P. But I like this idea of the way that siblings encourage each other. You talk about your own brother encouraging you to start a newspaper at your school. And is there a role that parents are encouraging this, or is it just the sort of culture of the family that's helping these siblings to push each other forward?
I do think that there are times when, frankly, parents are a little bit like, you see it in immigrant families in which the parents are working so hard that the siblings become each other's encouraging forces. And because maybe they can navigate the school system better than their immigrant parents, they are the ones coaching them through which classes to take. But I also think you see it in really, really close families, like even the Williams family. I talk about, obviously, the Williams sisters. If I'm recalling this correctly, Aisha, one of Serena and Venus's sisters, told me that there were 5 sisters who shared 4 beds, and so Serena would go from bed to bed. But there was this actual really physical closeness, physical proximity. I do think there's probably something to be said for siblings who share rooms. I talk about the Brontes throughout the book. Actually, I was obsessed with them as a kid. And I think for the same reason I was kind of interested in the Wasserstein family. They were a little bit isolated. They really had only each other, and they became incredibly close. I think that to the extent that parents can avoid making comparisons, which is the point at which things really can become toxic among siblings, then you have a really good shot at the siblings being a little bit more collaborative and feeling like there's room and space for everyone.
I was going to ask about that because we've talked about birth order a lot on this show and how siblings individuating from each other, the closer in age they are, the more likely they are to just 180 from each other. You're good at this, I'm good at that. In the animal world, it sets you up for success. Like, you need pretty feathers and I need a long beak if we're both going to survive. In the real world, did you see these siblings as individuating from each other, as having success in different parts of the world? Or did their success kind of grow together and support each other? Did they stick together and that's why they were successful?
Well, it's interesting because there's been a little bit of research from sociologists about how in lower income families, the siblings do not individuate that much because, for one thing, the kids don't have the access to all the extracurriculars that would allow them to. I grew up with a family in my childhood in which the parents picked a different sport for each of the kids so that they would each excel in their own domain. And it seemed really healthy. But if you don't have a lot of resources, if you can't be driving your kids around, maybe your kids aren't even taking tennis lessons, right? Like, they're home together. So I write a lot in this book about, there's a wonderful family, the Murguias, who grew up in Kansas City, Kansas. Their mother was a Mexican immigrant who really didn't speak much English. Their father worked at a factory. There was not a lot of private instruction going on in their home. And when you look at their careers and how they developed, one is the chief judge of the Ninth Circuit. One runs a massive Latino civil rights organization. One is a major Latino philanthropist. Another one was a federal judge. They absolutely brainstormed together and helped each other along. And they all went to law school. And so you see less individuation in that family. And it worked out really well. But if you're the Emanuels, let's say Rahm Emanuel, who's ambassador to Japan, and Zeke, who is a bioethicist at the University of Pennsylvania, and Ari, who runs Endeavor, they grew up, their father was a doctor, right? And so it's not that their careers reflected necessarily their extracurriculars, but I think that emphasis on collaboration wasn't as necessary because they could kind of individuate, if that makes sense.
Another thing that you point out in the book about differences between middle class, low income families is parents tend to invest more heavily in the child who seems the most destined for success in lower and middle income families, whereas higher income families tend to invest in the child who's struggling the most, which it kind of makes sense when I think about it. But talk a little bit about that research.
Yeah, that's work done by the sociologist at Princeton named Dalton Conley. And basically, he was much more interested in, like many, many researchers now, thinks that birth order effects have been way overblown, that really like the best, most exhaustive studies don't find that your birth order is what like predicts your future. He was much more interested in how, class, economics, those kinds of things influenced various aspects of how siblings turned out. And it makes sense. Like if you're an upper middle class family, chances are, just from what we know about how socioeconomic status works, if you're an upper middle class family, chances are your kids are going to be upper middle class. You don't have to worry about the ones who are thriving in school, but you do worry more about the one who is struggling. Whereas if you don't have tons of resources and you have one kid who's a star, you want to pour everything into that child and make sure that all the opportunities, you kind of need to pour everything you have in order for that student to maximize that student's potential.
We are talking to Susan Dominus, the author of The Family Dynamic, A Journey into the Mystery of Sibling Success, and we'll be right back.
Hellions, it's time for some spring cleaning, and I don't just mean the coat closets. Doing your financial spring cleaning can actually be super easy when you let Monarch do your financial spring cleaning for you. One dashboard that gets your entire financial life organized. No more clutter, no more mess, no more logins scattered everywhere, just accounts, investments, property, and more, all in one place. Get your first year of Monarch for half off, just $50 with promo code FRESH. Monarch allows you to look not only at what you've already spent, but also to plan for the future. With Monarch, you can set savings goals, plan for big purchases, and notice spending trends before they become a problem. I can generate cash flow reports that show me what we spent this quarter, this month, what we're probably going to spend next month, and feel prepared, organized, and knowing how to plan for the future. No more surprises and a lot more clarity. Try Monarch. Use code FRESH at monarch.com to get your first year half off at just $50. That's 50% off your first year at monarch.com with code FRESH. All my kids learned to swim when they were little. It was super important to me that they be confident and safe in the water. There was only one problem with that, taking them to swim lessons. I mean, the pools were freezing. There were always cranky adults doing laps right there. And it was definitely not, for any of us, what you would call fun.
Amy, heard. But now there's Goldfish Swim School. Goldfish takes a really thoughtful approach to swim lessons, combining research-based teaching with a warm, kid-friendly environment that actually helps kids thrive in the water.
Every detail at Goldfish is thoughtfully designed to create a golden experience, from shiver-free, warm indoor pools to comfy waiting areas for parents to professionally trained lifeguards on deck.
Goldfish uses an approach called the science of swim play, which combines guided play with proven teaching techniques to help kids learn to swim, build water safety skills, and gain confidence, all at their own pace. Lessons are designed to meet kids exactly where they're at.
If you've been thinking about swim lessons or just wondering where to start, this is a great opportunity. Right now, Goldfish Swim School is offering a waived membership plus your child's first lesson free at participating locations.
Just visit goldfishswimschool.com/free to find a location near you and enroll using promo code FREE.
That's goldfishswimschool.com/free, promo code FREE.
At DSW, we ask the important questions, like, what shoes are you going to wear? Whether you're prepping for wedding season, festival season, or just planning the ultimate vacay, the right shoes can make or break an RSVP. So own the moment. You've got big plans, and we've got just the shoes. At the perfect price, of course. Get ready to get ready with Designer Shoe Warehouse. Head to your DSW store or DSW.com today and let us surprise you.
So you write about it in the book, but tell us how you came to focus on these families and the challenges. I thought it was really interesting that as a journalist, you kind of know what you want to write about. Now you need to find people who are willing to be written about in this you really embedded with these families and spent a lot of time with them. So talk about that process of how you found who you were looking for, who you found, and how it was hard to get people on board.
So yeah, I thought it would be very straightforward. I'd ask around. People would tell me about families who are high achieving. I would reach out. They'd say, "Oh, we're so flattered. Thank you so much."
Not Susan Dominus from the New York Times. Come on in.
I mean, I think, first of all, I almost think there's nothing more hot to the touch in a way than sibling relationships, because very often when people are talking about their parents, especially if they themselves have led a full career and at age 70 can look back and say, I'm a success, their parents might not be alive, right? But the siblings, as I'm sure you know, that stuff is deep and complicated and very loving and can be very loving and very competitive and very fraught at the same time. So
right. Amy is one of 6. I'm one of 4. We definitely understand that sibling dynamics can be complex.
Yes, exactly. And so I think there were some families that didn't want to cooperate just because it felt like it was going to get too private. There were some families who didn't want to cooperate because there was one sibling who was maybe having a hard time and they thought it might be awkward or difficult. In some families, one of the siblings just thought, this isn't for us. I'm writing my own book, and then the other siblings had to go with it. And so I was actually surprised by how hard it was to find people who let me into their lives and really shared with me their stories. And I have to say, mostly the families came to me I had long lists of people that people recommended and I would research them. And a lot of people said no. And for me, I really wanted to write about people whom I admired. I just thought if I'm going to spend that much time in the company of these families, and I think my affection for these families does come through. I really, really respect them. And there was a little bit of a bias that I had also, which is to say that I wasn't interested in writing about people who came from upper middle class backgrounds and then went into upper middle class fields themselves. And maybe they were a partner at JP Morgan. That was like a little bit less interesting to me. I was interested in families that cultivated a culture of boldness and vision. The people I write about in this book, for the most part, they really were aiming for something kind of extraordinary. Lauren Groff wanted to be kind of a world-changing novelist. It wasn't enough for Lauren Groff to be a good novelist. It was important.
Nailed it, Lauren Groff.
Yes,
good job. You really did a great job on that.
I couldn't agree more. And her sister didn't want to just have a job and then do sports on the side. She wanted to be an Olympic athlete, and she went on to do that. Or the Murguias, they could have just, all of them, gone to law school. They did go to law school, and they could have landed in like very cushy firms and made a lot of money and represented God knows whom. But they didn't. They really devoted themselves to public service in a way that I found admirable. The Wojcicki sisters were trailblazers. They were pioneers in STEM at a time when that was not a given for women. So everybody I wrote about, for the most part, was, I think, aiming for something that was bigger than themselves. Even the Chen siblings who I write about, they were the children of Chinese immigrants. They're all in careers that give back. One of them is a doctor who works with the Chinese immigrant community a lot, which is something that her family could have benefited from when she was growing up in a town called Bristol, Virginia. Or their brother Gong works for an AI company that's trying to make English instruction as seamless, easy, and accessible as possible. Again, his parents would have hugely benefited from that. And then their brother E was the 5th person hired at this massively influential restaurant software business called Toast. It's almost ubiquitous now. And he's been made, frankly, phenomenally wealthy by having joined so early. Their IPO was the biggest in Boston history when it happened. But it was all about helping small businesses like the ones that his parents ran. They ran a restaurant, find easier ways to run their business. So my bar was kind of high in that regard. I really wanted people whose stories I found touching, inspiring, moving.
When you went into these families, I'm curious, and you're asking them, like, so what is the secret to your success? Did they bring to you this idea that, like, actually it was really my siblings that influenced me even more than my parents? It was our interplay. Did they have visibility on that, or did you sort of bring that to their attention?
It took a long time for me to get that. I mean, it took me a long time to really bear down on that myself. I really did go into this thinking it was exclusively a parenting book. And often they wanted to do it because they wanted to honor their parents, or the parents themselves wanted to impart their wisdom. So, I mean, there's a section of the book where I talk about people who've raised extraordinary kids who then went on to write books about how they did it. And I have to say that I do gently question whether they really do get to take all of the credit, because there are so many other factors involved. But like Esther Wojcicki wrote a whole book called Raising Successful Children about what she did with her children. So I think that everybody felt they wanted to honor their parents. In other words, they felt their parents were integral. It was just when I dug a little bit deeper, I saw the ways that the siblings were consequential for each other, starting with the Brontes. I mean, Charlotte Bronte was like snooping around her sister's papers one day and found some poetry that Emily Bronte had written. And they always wanted to be published authors, but weren't sure how to go about doing it. And she said to her sister, like, I think if we put your poems together with a few of mine, hey, Anne, do you have anything? Yeah, that's pretty good too. Okay. They put it all together in a book.
Throw it in the pile.
And that was the first book that they published, was a collective book of poetry, which sold, I think it was literally 2 copies, if that. But the reviews were good enough that they were encouraged. And Charlotte was really the one who kind of made the business part of it happen. Their father, I think, exposed them to great literature, which many people did not with women at the time. And he was an inspiring figure who himself had been this incredible, he'd gone from real poverty, like dirt floor kind of poverty in Ireland, to having a scholarship essentially at Cambridge. So he himself was what I call an overcomer. There are all these overcomer parents, like people who've done extraordinary things. But when it came down to it, it was really Charlotte who made things happen for her younger sisters. It never would have happened without her.
You talk a lot in the book about expectations. And there's a quote that I want to read that I thought was super interesting. I want us to break it down. Ultimately, the researcher found that parental expectations are a complex formulation that reflect early impressions of a child's ability, as well as the parent's pre-existing beliefs, a bi-directional process. These tweaked expectations have the power to influence the children's behavior, to shape it over time so that expectations become a self-fulfilling prophecy. There's a lot to unpack there.
I know. Maybe I should have written it a little more clearly.
No. But I think that this idea of expectations, like the Andre Agassi book, right? The dad retrofits a thing that serves tennis balls to serve them at like 150 miles an hour at the kids' heads. Basically like super glues rackets in their hands. And is like, this is the expectation of this family, which is a little off the rails and doesn't turn out great for the kids, at least according to Andre Agassi.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's interesting because my dear friend Jenny Anderson, who
just had her on the podcast.
So you know her work. Of course, she's written this great book called The Disengaged Teen. I have a great quote from her in that same chapter where she says that the science of expectations is maddeningly nuanced, because there's this idea that if you don't get it right, you actually can do some real damage. I mean, I am very suspicious of the parent whose children excel and the parent just says, well, we just set our expectations very high. Chances are that if your children are all excelling, they're bringing something to the table themselves. And then you kind of look back and say, well, it's because I set these high expectations. That said, so much of good parenting, I think I came to find from this book, is knowing your child, really understanding and knowing your child so that you set expectations that allow that child to believe that they can reach their potential and you know what their potential is. But if you set that expectation too high, we know that that is something that many researchers fear is contributing to a climate of anxiety. And it can even be counterproductive. If the child feels they're being expected to reach some goal that is not within the reach of that particular child, then you're not helping that child. That said, if you don't have any expectations, I quote a friend of mine who was very bright, but his parents had no expectations, and he felt very alone with his own ambitions, and that made it harder for him to realize them. Or even Janine Groff, the mother of the Groffs, she was extraordinary, but her parents had no expectations. When she hit her first roadblock in college in her pre-med classes, she said, I'm thinking about dropping. And they said, yeah, that seems like a good idea. Had they really been people who were understanding her potential and thinking about that, she absolutely had the potential to be a terrific doctor. She was an extraordinary woman. So yeah, do parents have to be invested in letting their kids know that they have expectations of them? I do believe that they do. And they set guidelines for kids. It gives them goals, but the challenge is not setting them too high. You can't look at all 3 of your kids. You can't have 2 kids who get all all A's. And then you have a third kid who is struggling in school and say, well, I'm sorry, the expectation in this family is that everybody gets A's. That's not going to help that third child. You have to know that child and help them be the best student that child can be, which might not be a straight A student. I do believe that.
But how do you know? So if you're the parent, and there are some families where every child is successful and there's boldness and vision and you go for it. I can understand the part, like it's really hard to have two older siblings who were perfect and did everything right. And so I'm going to go this way. And
you don't say, Amy. It's really hard.
Let's just say, I understand that thing. I've seen it played out in the lives of people that I know, but
people that you podcast with.
How are you the parent that's like, sure, we have these expectations, like you can do it too, not low expectation. Like, how do you balance it? Or do you just like let it get out of the way and let the sibling success be its own motivator for that third kid that has to live up to their older siblings?
Well, what's hard about this is that every kid is different. Like there are some kids who are going to be motivated by their sibling's success, and there's some kids who are going to be demotivated by it. As a parent myself, I just have not experienced any benefit to exerting pressure on either of my children ever. If you have a different experience, I would love to hear about it. You know, to be honest, in a funny way, and I know this is a sort of funny thing to say in a parenting podcast, but I do think that one of the takeaways of the book is that parents overestimate the effect that they have on their children and the influence they can have. And this is what I believe, at least, and that they underestimate the effects that they can't control, which are things like sibling effects or even peer effects. So sometimes people ask me like, well, what are the takeaways that you applied to your own parenting when you were writing this book? And I think one example is that because I wrote about the Chen siblings who were all very involved in the orchestra. And because of that, they were very close to other kids who were in the orchestra, and a lot of opportunities came of that. And they made a really close peer group of really good kids. And one of my sons played the bass. And I have to be honest, he was not exactly committed to practicing. And many was the time that we said to him, if you're really never going to practice, why don't we maybe just stop paying for private lessons and you can do something else? And he really didn't want to do that. And at a certain point, we realized, no. Keep him in the orchestra at all costs. Like, those are great kids. That is a great environment. Those are kids who like school, who like culture, who know the value of practice. And even if that doesn't exactly rub off onto him, it's a really healthy environment. So I sort of believe a little bit in like figuring out, you can't be checked out. You have to be involved in your kids' lives. They know whether you care or not, how they're doing in school, and you have to care. But I'm a big believer in delegating the sort of disciplinary role of instilling grit or instilling stamina or the belief in the value of practice. Let the amazing band instructor do that for your kid. Let the peer group that's in the orchestra or that's on whatever rigorous team. I always joke that I outsource our family values to Camp Beckett, where my kids went. It was like a tremendous place that really fostered a lot of integrity in young men. I just think you want your home to be a loving, safe place. And if you think it's your primary job to make sure that your child is working as hard as that child can possibly work in order to get the highest grades they can to get into college, I haven't seen that work in my own environment. The kids I know who thrive tend to be kids who are pretty motivated themselves and have support from their parents. Like the Chens, all the money they had, and they did not have a lot, they poured it into instruments and lessons for their kids. And the kids, for the most part, really loved that. You want to go to this soccer tournament that I have to now spend an entire weekend in Tampa, Florida. Like, okay, I will do that for you, but that's different. You want to be at the game, but you don't want to be there in order to make sure that your child plays the best they can possibly play. You want to be there to support the child and let them know that you care, but you're not the enforcer. I just don't think that's the greatest role for parents. Do you guys agree or disagree?
100% agree. We talk a lot about like optimal flow and optimal push. And I think there is a really specific strike zone for those things. It's a wide strike zone. So I think you can be on the top or the bottom of it. But I think there is definitely a strike zone.
It's Larry. I can't think of his name right now. He's a USTA coach, and he came up with this term optimal push. And his whole point is that your high-achieving kid, tennis player, whatever, should feel that your parental love is unconditional and not conditioned on how they perform. And that's really important for a high-achieving kid as they continue to hopefully achieve, that they know that they can just come home and relax and they don't have to talk more about tennis when they get home, I think is the optimal push.
That's exactly right. I loved honing in on all the little things that parents said to their kids that their kids remembered. Lauren Groff's father, and they felt high expectations from their parents. But at the end of the day, when the game was over, he was a coach of their various teams. He would say, keep the best and forget the rest. It wasn't about analyzing every play and what went wrong.
We're talking to Susan Dominus about her new book, The Family Dynamic, A Journey into the Mystery of Sibling Success. More after this. My favorite skincare products actually feel more like self-care, like they're so nice to put on and they smell so good that I'm actually happy when I get to that part of my day. And I swear that is how I feel about Osea's anti-aging body balm.
Amy, you are usually the lotions and potions queen on this podcast, but I have to say, hard agree.
Osea's anti-aging body balm is a liquid silk body balm that combines the lasting hydration of a lotion with the firming power of a serum, leaving skin smoother and firmer.
This body balm is clinically tested and designed to deliver visible results you can see and feel.
So we've gotten to use this product for a couple of months now, and I swear I have really noticed firmer and smoother skin, like on the back of my hands. It's like getting a mini spa treatment from head to toe.
Get a spring-worthy glow with clean, clinically tested skincare from Osea. And right now, we have a special discount just for our listeners.
Get 10% off your first order site-wide with code FRESH at OseaMalibu.com.
That's 10% off your first order with code FRESH at OSEAMalibu.com. Amy, when I'm having a good hair day, it usually makes my whole day better. And that's why on every day, I'm taking Nutrafol.
Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement brand. And it's the #1 hair growth supplement brand personally used by dermatologists. Nutrafol's hair growth supplements are peer-reviewed, NSF certified for sport, and clinically tested.
Nutrafol offers multiple formulas for men and women tailored to different life stages and lifestyle factors, so you get support that's actually right for you. Adding Nutrafol to your daily routine is easy. Order online, no prescription needed, with automated deliveries and free shipping to keep you on track.
Let your hair be one less thing to worry about. See visibly thicker, stronger, faster-growing hair in 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol.
For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you visit Nutrafol.com and enter promo code LAUGHING.
That's Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code LAUGHING.
So in part 3 of our podcast, we like to turn to solutions. And as I said, this book it's narrative, it's beautiful, it's sociology, it's looking at big picture stuff. But there are some takeaways that come from it that I want to discuss. And one which I really liked is watch without desire. That's kind of what we were talking about. And you talk about the Paulus family, and it's this ability, and man, I struggle with this, is because I am so good at everything. And if everyone would just listen to me, the world would be a better place. And so I was just telling Amy, one of my kids' coaches, I said, you need to talk to him about blah, 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 and making da. And he said, I will talk to him, but you're not allowed to be there. This needs to come from me, not from you. And you have another takeaway about this, but I think that I love watching you play, which we heard a long time ago, right? That's a great reaction to kids' sports is I love watching you play. Not if you had just swung a little, if you had just connected with that ball, that would have been the homer. And so watch without desire. I feel like I really get that phrase.
Yeah, and I'll tell you a little bit of the backstory of that, which is it was this woman, Taruko Paulus, who had immigrated from Japan and married a man who, like her, really loved the arts. And they raised their children in New York City. And what for other people is the Dolly Dingle storefront ballet instruction, for them was basically the American Ballet Theater. Their daughter, Diane Paulus, who went on to become kind of a legendary female director, started dancing very young there. I mean, I think she was something like 10 when she was on stage with Baryshnikov. And she was obviously a very talented girl, but her mother, who worked very hard herself, nonetheless came to every single performance that she did, even if it meant standing for the entirety of it in the back row. And what Diane said was that she felt that her mother always watched without desire, in the sense that she wasn't a stage mother. She wasn't pushing her. She didn't give her feedback. But at great almost physical cost because her mother was working so hard. She was there. She was present. She was a loving, benevolent presence. And I think we all know that the American Ballet Theater is rigorous enough that probably she didn't need to be coaching her. She outsourced that. Even Diane's older sister had actually also attended a very rigorous ballet school, and they wanted their daughters to love the arts. But I think there was a part of them that also was very pleased that those are places that instill real rigor and where you get really used to getting critical feedback, but not from your parents. You're getting it from the instructors, from the people who are the best at what they do, which generally, I'm sure you're a great tennis coach or baseball coach, Meg, whichever you were doing. But I'm going to guess that the coach is even a little better. Track. Maybe the track coach is even a little better. So I think there's this idea of like letting the coach coach, letting the parent parent. And what that means is providing safety, comfort, and unconditional love.
First of all, maybe. I'm not signing off on that. I may be better than the coach. I'm not agreeing to anything at this juncture, but I see your point.
I have a question about that. So like because we were talking before about how it is upper class families that have tennis coaches and extensive ballet training and things like that. For somebody who might be really struggling, they have a kid, clearly has a talent, and it would be a reach to get them into lessons. Is it like the presence of that adult or maybe even older sibling who's not the parent who's going to push the kid? Is that a part of success?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I saw in the Chen family also. So their mother did find superb instructors for them. I mean, by hook or by crook. She was a very unusual person. I mean, a lot of these people lowered their rates for the family because the kids were so hardworking. But again, in the Chen family, it was the siblings who really coached each other. And a cousin lived with the Chens for a while, and he told me that they were the secret of why each of them did so well. The oldest sister would sit with the younger brother and actually work with him on his piano music, or she wanted to do duets with her younger brother and he wasn't learning the music fast enough to do the duets with her at home. So she taught him herself. You really do see that happen, I think. But I also do think it does seem like the purview of the wealthy, like, find the best travel team. But it can also be a matter of finding who's the coach that you admire most at that school, who you think has the best ethics, ethos, discipline, rigor, has just the best kind of coaching skills. Maybe you can coax your child towards that sport. Or, this is something that obviously upper middle class parents do more than parents who feel less privileged, but really making an effort to get your kid into the class with a teacher who you think is going to have a great influence on your child. Or even, I'm a big believer in community, you know what I mean? Like maybe there's someone who is retired who you think is a great role model for your kid. Maybe you want to have your child go over there and help with the yard work or something like that, just to sort of foster those relationships.
I like the story of the Holyfield family. The idea, I think, can get a little bit okay, this is the key to unlock my child being a prima ballerina or an Olympian or whatever, first chair in the symphony. But it seems like the opening of just the idea of possibility, the idea of being able to break down barriers that fostered this environment in which these children became lawyers and activists. And we've talked to a lot of people on the podcast, where you start the question, knowing what is possible. The famous story that the 4-minute mile wasn't broken for hundreds of years. And then the year Bannister breaks it, 17 people run a sub 4-minute mile. And I think that seemed really inspiring to me, telling your children the line for what's possible starts way farther than you think.
Wow, that is so beautifully put. And I will probably continue to use that metaphor as I go forward. I will try to credit you, but it's really helpful. So the Holyfields were 3 siblings who were growing up in the Jim Crow South of Tallahassee, Florida. But their father, who had grown up one of many, many children on a farm in Mississippi, had somehow gotten himself across the country to Alabama, where he went to Tuskegee. He took 7 or 8 years to finally get his degree in agriculture and went on to study with George Washington Carver, the most famous Black scientist of his time. And their mother had grown up in Boston, also Black, had gotten a nursing degree, and then came down to Tallahassee. And I think wanted to open a nursing school for Black women at a certain level, the likes of which simply did not exist. And Marilyn, her daughter, remembers her mother petitioning the state and writing letter after letter and getting rejected until finally she got a green light. And her mother created this nursing school that created a pathway for women to the middle class and beyond who literally had been picking cotton in the not too distant past. So as Marilyn said, the motto in their family was unspoken motto, but it was the feeling there was all things possible. Their parents, they then took their resources and started buying real estate and developed like a pretty substantial real estate development business. They became fairly affluent people, having really come from extremely modest backgrounds. And by the way, being Black in Tallahassee, Florida. So I think there was a sense that those rules, those limits, those don't apply to us. Like we can go farther. Other people probably can too, but we know that we can because we've seen it in action. So the limit of what you can do is at a higher threshold, I think, for sure.
You said something before about family mottos that a lot of the families you studied had one. Say more about that.
Yeah, I love that. I always joke that the only thing that I heard my father say reliably often was, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. Like, gee, why did I become a journalist? I can't possibly imagine. Yeah, I love these families. So what was interesting was that Marilyn said the unspoken motto in her family was all things possible. The Murguia's mother actually used to say, with God's help, all things are possible. So it was these two women who've never met, who don't know each other, living different parts of the country, different backgrounds, but they have that same ethos that resonates in the family. I thought that was really inspiring. Their father used to say, so they were growing up Mexican-American, very financially disadvantaged. There were something like 9 people in like a very tiny house. And their father used to say to them, the sun shines down on all of us. And what he meant by that was there's opportunity for everyone. He also used to say, you're no better than anyone else, but no one's better than you. Real messages of equality and opportunity. You know, they're both messages too that I find very moving because it's both inspiring to the kids, but they also have a real message of almost a social justice message quietly. Does the sun shine down on all of us in terms of the opportunities available? Not really, but like, should it? And can you believe it? And can you aspire to that and aspire to create a world where the sun does shine down on all of us? That's kind of what the Murguia siblings did and do.
This is a fantastic book. There's so much in it for every parent, but it's also just so readable, great stories. So we will put the bookshop link so you can get your copy from an independent bookseller. And Susan, tell us where else you can be found out on the World Wide Web.
Well, my website, my brand new website is susanpdominus.com. And I am a frequent contributor. Obviously, I'm a staff writer at the New York Times Magazine. So my work can be found, decades of it, in fact, on the New York Times website.
This was a long time coming, this episode, this reunion, and we're really excited to have everybody find out about this book.
Thank you so much. I've been looking forward to it for weeks and weeks, and it's been every bit as fun as I thought it would be. It's true. It's really true. And I'm
so great to see you. Thanks for talking to us today.
Thanks, you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan.
The right window treatments change everything. Your sleep, your privacy, the way every room looks and feels. At Blinds.com, we've spent 30 years making it surprisingly simple to get exactly what your home needs. We've covered over 25 million windows and have 50,000 5-star reviews to prove we deliver. Whether you DIY it or want a pro to handle everything from measure to install, we have you covered. Real design professionals, free samples, zero pressure. Right now, get up to 45% off site-wide, plus get a free professional measure at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions apply.